Section 2. Grounds for denial or suspension. Ways to lose your real estate license. Grounds for denial or suspension. The room was unusually quiet after Michael finished speaking. Ashley looked down at the binder labeled Lessons Learned, then over at the certified envelope from ADRE that still sat unopened on the conference table. "I have to admit," she said, "I never realized how much responsibility came with having a real estate license." Michael smiled. "Most people don't." He slowly opened the certified envelope and removed several pages. One document immediately caught Ashley's attention. Across the top, in bold print, were the words ARS Section 32-2153, Grounds for Denial, Suspension, or Revocation of Licenses. Michael slid the document across the table. "This," he said, "is probably one of the most important statutes every Arizona real estate licensee should understand. Not because I expect you to memorize every paragraph, but because almost every disciplinary case eventually finds its way back to something contained in this statute." Ashley flipped through the pages. "There are a lot more reasons to lose a license than I expected." David laughed. "And that's exactly why most agents never read it until it's too late." Michael nodded in agreement. One of the biggest misconceptions in our industry is that agents lose their licenses because they commit one huge act of fraud. While that certainly happens, it's actually much more common for ADRE to discipline licensees because of ordinary business decisions that slowly drift outside the law. Today, ARS Section 32-2153 contains numerous grounds that allow the commissioner to deny an application, suspend a license, revoke a license, issue a letter of concern, place a licensee on a provisional license, or impose other disciplinary action when necessary to protect the public. The statute has evolved over the years to address modern real estate practices, but its purpose has never changed. Consumer protection remains the department's highest priority. Ashley looked up. "So ADRE doesn't just revoke licenses?" "Not at all," Michael replied. "Discipline isn't always about taking someone's license away. Sometimes the commissioner determines that education is the appropriate response. Other times, a licensee may receive a letter of concern, which serves as a warning that a practice should be corrected before it develops into a more serious violation. In other cases, the commissioner may issue a civil penalty, place a licensee on a provisional license with conditions, suspend the license for a period of time, or revoke it entirely. The discipline depends upon the facts of each case, the seriousness of the conduct, whether the public was harmed, and whether the licensee has demonstrated a pattern of similar behavior." David leaned forward. "And that's something many agents don't understand. ADRE isn't looking to punish people for making an honest mistake. They're looking to determine whether the public was placed at risk and whether the licensee acted honestly, professionally, and within the law." Michael smiled. "Exactly." He highlighted the first few provisions of the statute. The very first ground involves misrepresentation or making false promises. Think about how often agents are tempted to exaggerate during a transaction. An agent tells a seller, "We'll definitely have multiple offers this weekend." Another tells a buyer, "You'll have no problem adding a guest house to the property." Or perhaps an agent tells a client, "The HOA would never enforce that rule." Ashley interrupted, "But agents say things like that all the time." "They do," Michael replied, "and sometimes those statements turn into complaints." He explained that one of the easiest ways to create liability is by presenting opinions as though they are facts. Arizona licensees are expected to provide accurate information, disclose material facts they know or should know, and avoid making promises about matters beyond their control. If an answer depends on another professional, such as an attorney, engineer, lender, surveyor, contractor, or municipal planning department, the safest response is often to recommend that the client obtain information directly from the appropriate expert. That approach not only protects the consumer, it protects the licensee as well. Michael continued turning the pages. "Another common ground for discipline involves representing more than one party in a transaction without the knowledge and informed consent of everyone involved. Arizona allows limited representation under certain circumstances, but transparency is critical. Hidden conflicts of interest are one of the quickest ways to destroy consumer trust." David smiled. "I've always told my agents that secrets don't belong in real estate transactions." Ashley laughed. "That sounds simple enough." "It is," David replied, "but people sometimes convince themselves that withholding information makes the transaction easier." Michael nodded, "And that's usually when things become much harder." He continued explaining that another frequently cited ground for discipline is simply violating Arizona real estate law or the commissioner's rules, now incorporated within the requirements for licensees, including AAC R428-1101, which establishes many of the professional duties expected of Arizona licensees. These duties include promoting and protecting the client's interests while dealing fairly with all parties, exercising reasonable skill and care, disclosing material facts, presenting all offers and counteroffers as required, maintaining transaction records, and communicating honestly throughout the transaction. Violating these professional duties often becomes the foundation for additional disciplinary allegations because they reflect how a licensee conducts business every day. Ashley paused for a moment before asking another question. So what do investigators actually look for first? Michael didn't hesitate. Patterns. He explained that investigators rarely focus on only one document. Instead, they review the entire transaction looking for consistency. Was the advertising truthful? Were disclosures delivered on time? Were conversations documented? Were trust funds handled correctly? Did the broker provide reasonable supervision? Did the transaction file comply with Arizona's record retention requirements under ARS Section 32-2151.01? When several small deficiencies appear together, they often paint a much larger picture than any single mistake would suggest. David leaned back in his chair. You know what's interesting? Some of the best agents I've ever worked with are also the most cautious. They don't assume. They verify. They don't cut corners because they're busy. They slow down when something doesn't feel right. Michael smiled. That's exactly why they've stayed successful. He looked around the conference room before closing the statute book. Over the next several sections, we're going to take many of these individual grounds for discipline and break them apart. We'll examine real-world situations, discuss what went wrong, identify the laws involved, and most importantly, learn how those mistakes could have been prevented before ADRE ever became involved. Ashley closed her notebook. I thought this class was going to teach me how agents lose their licenses. Michael smiled. It will. But by the time we're finished, my goal is something much more valuable. I want to teach you how to keep yours. Real-world Arizona example. A designated broker once received a routine request from ADRE for a transaction file following a consumer complaint involving a disclosure issue. The broker believed the complaint would be resolved quickly because the transaction had closed successfully months earlier. However, when investigators reviewed the complete file, they discovered missing emails, incomplete documentation of material conversations, inaccurate advertising, and inadequate broker review notes. While none of those issues alone appeared significant, together they demonstrated a pattern of poor compliance. The investigation ultimately resulted in multiple violations under ARS Section 32-2153 and reinforced an important lesson. Investigators rarely evaluate only the complaint. They evaluate how the licensee conducted the entire transaction. Broker tip: don't think of ARS Section 32-2153 as a list of ways to lose your license. Instead, think of it as a roadmap showing where other licensees made mistakes. Every disciplinary case you learn from is one mistake you hopefully never have to make yourself. Online discussion question 1. Michael explains that ADRE investigators often look for patterns rather than isolated mistakes. Why is identifying a pattern of conduct important during a disciplinary investigation? Model answer. A pattern may demonstrate that the issue was not simply an isolated oversight, but part of the licensee's normal business practices. ADRE evaluates whether the public was placed at risk and whether the licensee consistently complied with Arizona law, the requirements for licensees, and brokerage policies. Question 2. Why do you think misrepresentation is one of the first grounds listed in ARS Section 32-2153? Model answer. Consumers rely on real estate professionals to provide accurate information when making significant financial decisions. Misrepresentation undermines public trust, can cause financial harm, and directly conflicts with a licensee's duty to deal honestly and fairly. Question 3. Michael advises agents not to present opinions as facts. Can you think of situations where an agent should refer a client to another professional instead of giving an answer? Model answer. Examples include legal questions, tax advice, engineering concerns, zoning issues, structural conditions, property boundaries, lending decisions, or HOA legal interpretations. Referring clients to qualified experts protects both the client and the licensee.